But I was trying to get my ticket and with my glasses on, and something came up that there was wrong with the printer. And I was trying really hard to read it, and then suddenly the message was like, I was just like,
welcome to day 4 of IFP's Independent Film Week and Conference. I'm excited to see all you here. Thanks for coming out at 10 o'clock in the morning for our keynote today. Today is our day that we're talking about new ideas in storytelling. So we're talking not just about feature films, but also about transmedia, and about television, and about all the different ways that you as storytellers can get your point across. And I'm really, as a media maker and as a curator, I'm really excited about these ideas and the sort of like new frontiers in storytelling. So I'm especially excited about our keynote today, Michel Reilhac, who I think is going to blow your minds just seeing his PowerPoint, the first scene of his PowerPoint here in front of me. And I just want to, before we get started, just go over quick housekeeping. As with other days of the conference, no flash photography and no video recording, please. And also no food and drink in the auditorium. And today, we have a couple of sponsored opportunities for you guys. We have a Filmmaker Lounge, which is in the Furman Gallery. So if you need a quiet spot, you need a Wi-Fi, you need a cup of coffee, you can go across the street to the Furman Gallery, which is at the Walter Reed Theater on 65th Street, and it's upstairs. And that's open to you from 11 o'clock this morning through the rest of the day. And we also have sponsor panels in the afternoon at the Filmmaker Center, at the Film Center, which is the Orange Movie Theater on 65th Street, the Film Society of Lincoln Center's movie theater. And there's presentations from Tuscany about shooting in Italy, which includes wine, and also presentations from Kodak and Canon. And those are going to be really awesome. There's details of them in your conference schedule, and if you have any questions, just seek us out and we can answer those for you. And also, of course, huge thanks to our IFP Independent Film Week premier sponsors, RBC and HBO, and the Film Society of Lincoln Center for their partnership. I think that's all my housekeeping. So without further ado, I want to give a huge welcome to Michel Reilhac, whose keynote I'm really looking forward to. Michel?
Hello, so I'm head of cinema for Arte in France. It's a broadcasting company, a cultural public broadcasting company that is set up in France and in Germany. I would like to talk about transmedia from a broadcaster standpoint and see why should we get interested in this new field. And the very first reason came up this morning. I was up at 5 o'clock because of the jet lag, and I didn't know what to do with myself, so I just started dancing naked in my room, you know, with silly music in my earphones. And I realized at that point that my foot actually started me on the right track to get involved and interested in transmedia, because when I was very young, I dated a dancer, and she took me to her dance class, and the teacher saw my feet, and I have naturally arched feet. I didn't do anything for those, and that got me to start dancing. But at the time, I was a student in a master's in business administration, which did not prepare me at all for dancing. And from that point on, I was 19 at the time, I started being a complete schizophrene in the sense that I was studying for very serious matters, and I was at the same time a dancer, and then later in theater, etc. So that prepared me for what is happening today, is the hybridization of really everything that we do, that we look at. And this is, from a more serious standpoint, what I would like to address. One of the first reasons why I think as broadcasters we should get involved in new media, hybrid media, is really because television, as well as the cinema, are aging media. It's the old form of media. We know that most most excuse me, teenagers and most young people today do not watch television anymore. They just watch content on their computers and other platforms. So for that reason, we just need to consider what it is that we need to do now. That doesn't mean that we have to give up the idea that the stories that we tell in a very traditional, linear, passive way need to be done with, need to be stopped just because the pleasure of being passively listening to a story or watching a story is a wonderful pleasure, and that is exactly what we loved when we were kids, if we were lucky enough to have a father or a mother telling us bedtime stories. But a television today, a broadcaster, needs to define itself through the content that it provides and no longer through the platform that it uses to offer the content. We're no longer at a point where a broadcaster can consider itself as the television set that will be the medium through which it gives its content. So we see ourselves more as content providers and content curators. That being said, the hierarchy that there is in media is very, very much something that everyone is aware of. And I would just like, for the sake of the exercise, to make a comparison with fashion. You could consider that the movies in festivals, when they premiere, you know nothing about them, when you get the shock of the newness of the festival, is really, is the equivalent of haute couture. You could say that movies in theaters would be the equivalent of prêt-à-porter, that television would be your main shopping mall, shopping experience, and the internet would be your discount stores. You could do the same parallel with food, for instance, with all the different kinds of restaurants that you can decide to go and feed yourself. This is just to point the fact that the media world has matured to the point where we can have all kinds of different experiences, not necessarily at the same time, but depending on our budgets, depending on our availability, depending whether we want to have the experience on our own or with friends, etc. The other reason why we need to look at hybrid content is because all media are converging. By this I mean that less and less we are seeing devices which are reserved for only one usage. Most devices, toys, domestic appliances, screens, are used for communicating, for watching content, for playing games, etc. And you're seeing more and more of those drawings and sketches that are totally impossible to read and understand. They make really nice pictures. You can see on this one that someone has made the effort to try and project themselves beyond 2025, trying to illustrate how services and content and devices will sort of converge and blend in one object. The same way, you probably know this sketch, which shows how everything converges no matter what platforms are used in the first place. The other reason why we need to question ourselves about evolving in terms of what we do as broadcasters is because more and more the web is about curation, and content being curated to people is what is making a difference between services that work and services that don't work. Television has always been a curator of content, and for that reason, I think it's a strong point that broadcasters have to continue offering an editorial line, choices that are that have a direction, that have a specialty, and therefore allow us to keep this idea of being a content curator and just bringing it to all the platforms that are available. Jane McGonigal, who's a wonderful game designer, and some of you may know the TED Talk that she did a few years ago on gaming, pointed out that today young adults who are coming of age and entering society, starting to work, starting to have jobs, maybe start families, have spent as much time playing games as they have spent learning stuff in school. And the amount of time that they've spent doing both is roughly 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours is roughly the amount of time you need to become a virtuoso at anything. So what we're seeing today is that we're seeing a whole generation of people entering society who are experts at playing games and who take gaming, playing, for granted. It is something they do, and they don't consider it something that only kids do. So this is bound to have a major impact on how we operate, how we relate to one another. And the gameplay aspect of all content is something that will grow because of that. And if we don't look into how can we include gameplay within the stories that we're telling, we may very much lose a lot of our potential audience, just because it is going to become more and more something that will be taken for granted, that should be included in the storytelling mechanic. When we talk of transmedia, we do not always talk about the same thing. To me, there are really four kinds of transmedia stuff. The first one is just web content. A lot of people think that if they do a web series, a web doc to be posted on the web, that's transmedia. It's not to me, it's just content for the web. And if the web is the main platform for the content, it's just another platform, but it doesn't have anything to do with transmedia. Cross-media, and of course all of this is, I won't go into debate on vocabulary. We know that transmedia is not a good word, we know that cross-media is not a good word, and they will be replaced by other words, but I don't want to waste time in this debate. But cross-media, for lack of a better word, is a notion when you have a linear story and you just slice it up in webisodes or mobisodes to adapt it to other platforms. But the basic content remains a linear story, which you have just adapted to another platform than the main platform that you designed it for, whether it's television or cinema. That's not transmedia to me, because it's just adapting a linear story to another platform. Marketing is where really the notion of transmedia started, because about 10 years ago, that's where the first ARGs were designed by studios for franchise movies to try and attract new groups of people in more dynamic ways to go and buy tickets for the feature film. Most of these new approaches were all financed through the promotion and marketing budget. And to this day, most transmedia stuff which is done is financed as part of the marketing and promotion budget, and it services, in a way, the main product, which is the series or the feature film. What I am particularly interested in is what I consider true transmedia, which we call native transmedia stories. And these really are stories which are designed from the ground up, using different platforms, internet, real life, movies, television, as pieces of a puzzle, so that when you watch, experience, participate, more than just one piece of the puzzle, more than one platform within the story world, you get a much fuller experience of what the story is about. But each piece of the puzzle, just like in a puzzle, is not the same thing. It's not the same story which is transported to another platform. It's another aspect, it's another point of view. And the main character on the internet part of the story world may just not be there in a real life event that you're designing, in a flash mob, or in a television series. The constraint in this system is that each piece of the puzzle has to be a standalone, because you cannot request an audience to see or participate or experience every single piece of the puzzle to get the understanding of what the story world is about. So each piece of the puzzle, whether you go through the experience of a web doc and nothing else around it, you need to have a fully satisfactory story experience just with that. So that's one of the challenges of building a native transmedia story, is that each piece has to be a complete experience in itself, but the sum of several of the pieces create a fuller experience. Sorry if it's a little bit abstract, but I will go into special cases in a minute. The other reason why we need to look at alternative ways of telling stories is because really, when you think about it, the work that we do, if we are producers, writers, directors in television or in cinema, is not to make films. It is to tell stories. And it doesn't matter, at the end of the day, whether we tell our story through the traditional standards of film storytelling or television storytelling. And if we start exploring either technological options that we have now, or just structural new options, it doesn't matter as long as we tell the story we need to tell. And if you start expanding the scope of your perception of what it is today, this thing which we call the art of storytelling, you just break free from the constraints of the rules that have been established for the last 100 years of what we think is the art of making films. And what I like about this is that it forces us to change the perception that we have of what we really mean when we talk about fiction versus reality. If you think about it, what we call reality, and which very often we try to consider as the experience of physical reality, and that everything that is not physical or determined physically, because we die, because we need to eat, because we need to sleep, or we get sick, all of that is things we don't have control over, and this is what we call reality. Everything else, when we go to a movie, when we read a book, is fiction. It's outside of reality. That's how we think of it. But if you really take a moment to think deeper, you realize that it's not true. More and more stories, fiction, is part of what we call reality. And I'd like to take just 3 examples to try and illustrate what I mean. The way we dress, for instance. The way we dress is a fiction that we stage for ourselves. Even if we're not interested in fashion or in clothes and we just pick up the same t-shirt we've been wearing for the last week, still it's a statement about what we are, how we want to be perceived, and it sends a signal which will be different. And if we need to dress up because we're going to a party in the evening, we're dressing up, we're the same person, but we're not, because we're dressing up for a special situation, which is a fiction. And that makes part of our reality. Using the social networks, Facebook is a makeup. It's a way we design the ideal self that we would like to project towards other people. It's not ourselves, it's not our real selves. It's a stage, it's a makeup, it's a way we project who we are. But this image of ourselves that we are projecting through social networks and self-branding through them is very much and more a part of who we are considered to be by others. The third example is the fact that through all this, the other around us in general is our audience, and we have more and more a relationship towards one another, which is the relationship of a performer towards an audience. And we are performing our lives more and more, projecting this image that our own stories are designed to build around us. So I'd like to just illustrate what I'm talking about through specific examples of what we have been doing at Arte since we have chosen hybrid content as the foundation of the global strategy for the company. And we are deeply committed to exploring, trying, making things, and it's really a fascinating time right now. We have the luxury, I'm aware of that, to be a publicly funded company, so we have funds available to do this, to experiment. It's a luxury, but we are trying to make the most out of this, to try things, fail and try again, and sometimes succeed. We started in this field a few years ago to become recognized for the first web docs that we designed and that gathered a lot of awards and who set a few standards. Gaza Sderot was one of them. You may have heard of it. It was about a parallel between communities in the Gaza Strip and on the other side of the border in Israel. A second one, which was talked a lot about, was Prison Valley, who was shot here in the US, about a community in Colorado, which economy is entirely based on private jail systems. Those web docs served as references for us, but it's very much now part of our past already. We have moved on to other types of experiences. One of them that we did early this year, it was during the holiday season at the end of 2011 and early 2012, we launched a small French feature movie by a first-time director, Cyril Menegel, and the film was called Louise Wimmer. The distributor had no money whatsoever to pay for a serious promotional campaign and posters, etc. So we came up with an idea that I suggested to the distributor, and it was that we wrote 12,000 post-its, one of those stickers. I don't know if you call them that in the US, post-its. They were all handwritten. And on the post-it, you can see on the right-hand picture, it was just Louise Wimmer and a cell phone number. And we posted that in the subway, on building doors, on cars, everywhere, in Paris, in Lille, and in Lyon. And people would call this number out of curiosity. There was no reference to anything. And they would reach Louise Wimmer, not the actress, but the character. And they would have the opportunity to enter in a conversation with Louise Wimmer, the character, and talk about the issue of the film, which is the story is about this woman who sleeps in her car. She has just a few odd jobs, and she has applied to get an apartment to live decently. Not really a comedy. So it was difficult to launch this, and we tried to build around the idea of what can we do for people who are in the same situation as the main character. And we had a 13% return out of the 12,000 post-its that were posted. We got 13% actual phone calls, which is a huge number. And it turned out that we had a Facebook page for the character with all kinds of contacts for organizations that could help people in dire situations the same way. We helped a lot of people through that. It was a big success, and we could measure, not very precisely, the transformation of people who actually called and who went to see the movie, and that was very interesting. We are also involved in doing transmedia movies. One of them, which is in production right now, is called Rosa by Lucille Chauffour, a young French filmmaker, which will start by building two completely different communities on the web. One will be more oriented towards women and will deal with the burlesque aesthetics, and the other will be geared more towards a male geek audience and will be about the history of cybernetics and computer sciences. And progressively, the story will be geared so that the two communities start merging in a way, creating a communal trunk for the story, and we'll start providing content that the director will include in the feature film that will be the end result of the process. I have resigned from Arte 3 weeks ago, and I'm going to be doing my job until the end of November, but after that I will be entirely committed to doing my own work as a transmedia writer and storyteller and director. And one of the projects which will be co-produced by Arte is this one. Ultra Trail, for those of you who may not be familiar, is the name given to these extreme races that some people run in the world, in nature environment. For 200 miles, 250 miles, they may run for 50, 60 hours without stopping. You can imagine the kind of states they're in. And the project will be built of 7 different blocks using 7 different platforms. 3 will be documentary, 4 will be fiction. Each block, like I said before, will be an autonomous, a standalone experience for the viewer, but the more blocks you see, the fuller the experience of the whole story you will have. Another thing which is completely different that we're doing is an augmented reality app that we are producing right now, and it's called Cinema City. If it works out okay in Paris, we will export it to Berlin, Tokyo, and New York. The idea behind Cinema City is to take into account the fact that a city like Paris has been used as a set for over 12,000 feature films. We will be creating this geo-localized app where if you find yourself in a spot in Paris where a scene was shot from in one of the films, the app will activate this scene and you'll be able to see the excerpt from the film directly on your phone from where you stand. You'll be able to play the game of guessing who's the director, the actor, the year, and you get points that you can redeem as invitations to sets of films being shot in Paris at that moment, or premiere screenings, etc. We can also set up, we will be setting up a website where you can play games and access the list of films that are, the excerpts that are available. The spots will be organized also in thematic walks like this one, for instance, along the Seine River. You can walk down the Seine and meet the excerpts as you go along. We will have all kinds of other walks, and the idea is that the edit of the content that you access is your actual physical move through the city. We found out that the main motivation for foreign tourists to come to Paris was to actually see the real locations of the films they loved. For instance, Midnight in Paris by Woody Allen attracted huge amounts of new tourists to Paris who came for the first time to Paris because they wanted to see the locations of the film. We're working on transmedia documentaries as well. We're working on one which is called How I Hate Math, and we have started a campaign calling for user-generated content for people on the web to talk about why they love math or why they hate math. And it's incredible, the videos that we're getting from people from all over the world, and a lot of them, a few of them, will be included in the documentary, throughout the documentary. And out of all the content, we are starting a social network around math for people to share between those that love them and those that hate them. We did an experience end of March, which was called the Time Submarine. I locked myself in a theater in Paris with 70 people for 48 hours. We had no watch, no cell phone, no computers, no way to measure time. And the idea, the poetic idea behind the experience was to see if we cut ourselves off from the present, can we get in touch with the future? The experience was documented, and we're right now finishing the data visualization of the result of all the information we compiled during the experience. It was a very, very strong emotional experience for everyone, and we are now working on turning it into an installation participatory theatrical piece that would travel to different festivals and theaters. The interest for us at Arte is not only the data visualization content that we can post on the internet afterwards, but it's the experience, the participatory dimension of a fiction experience for the audience. I am working right now on another experience which is based on LARPing. I don't know if any of you are familiar with LARP. LARP means live action role play, and it comes very much from the Nordic countries. And this is, as the name says, a role play. And the difference between the traditional role plays that when you hear role play, you probably remember Dungeons and Dragons, and to you it might evoke, pretending to be a wizard or being a princess in a dungeon somewhere and playing silly games, to try and get the princess out of the dungeon with the help of a dragon. Nordic LARP is very different. It's the same dynamic, becoming someone, a fictitious character, but that happens in real life and around themes, stories that are related to the real world and not a heroic fantasy world. We are going to apply this for the first time ever to a movie. We're going to be screening a movie. The movie is called On Tour by Michel Reilhac, a French movie. It was in competition in Cannes last year. And we will create two groups of players, one in Berlin, one in Paris, of 28 players. There are 28 characters in the film. Each player will be a character, and when the film ends, they will continue the story for 5 hours. They will just take the end of the story and be the characters and create an ending to the story. Now, of course, the group in Berlin and the group in Paris will take the story to two completely different places. We will be documenting also this game, and we will give the account of what has happened on internet, which will be posted the night when we screen the film for our audience. If that works, we don't know if it's going to work. If that works, this is a concept that we will start developing and doing it regularly for several of the films that we do. To end my presentation, I would like to suggest we do a little creative exercise, all of us together. I'm working, and this is connected to something that I'm working on right now. There's a new app which is going to be made available in about 3 weeks from now called TVT. TVT is an app that allows you, with your iPad or with your cell phone, to interact with the main screen, with your television. Right now, the app will be used for adverts, for commercials on TV. You watch a commercial about shampoo, let's say. The second that the ad starts, the app recognizes it and provides you with additional content, with a game, with questions, with educational content around hair, whatever, and that lasts the length of the commercial. And there's a gameplay component where you can get points. What I'm working on right now with Arte, we want to make a small competition where I would like to commission 3 short films of 3 minutes length each, which would use this device, activating the 2 screens, but telling a story. For instance, you could see a scene, a couple having an argument on your TV screen. The husband leaves the house, bangs the door, takes his car, and goes to a bar and gets drunk, while the wife is staying home and is calling her best friend for her to come in so they can talk about what happened. That's usually what people do in a couple. What would happen is that on your main screen, you would see the end of the argument and you would see the man leave. When the man leaves, the app will recognize that moment and will start its own video, so that on the additional screen you follow the guy and you see what will happen, and on the main screen you follow the wife and see what happens. So you are within the same story, but with 2 completely different points of view. So I would like to suggest this exercise to you now for 5 minutes. Could you just write or come up with an idea, any idea that you might have that would use this idea of having two connected screens, telling the story around a particular situation, and you can send it to me to this address, and then I will, everyone who will have sent me one, I will then forward to the whole group that will have sent me all the stories that you would have sent me. And among these stories, if we will read them, and if there is one or two or three that we really like, we will get in touch with you and see if we can develop the short film that we're going to produce with you. So you don't have to do it, but if you would like to take 5 minutes, you can write on your iPad or on your phone and just send it directly to me at this address. And we start now. 5 minutes. Is there any question about how that works? If there is, feel free to ask.
So it's about the couple fighting.
No. I was talking about the couple fighting as an example, just to illustrate. But it could be a merry-go-round where you have people on the main screen, passing through and then exiting, and then they would enter on your other screen, from the other side and going. So it could be anything. It could be. Yeah.
Are these screens simultaneous, or does the broadcast screen show first?
No, they're simultaneous. It has to happen at the same time within a 3-minute slot. It doesn't have to be narrative. It can be purely visual also. It can be documentary. It can be anything. But one screen, the smaller screen, relates to the main screen, reacts to the main screen. It's wonderful to see you so focused. It's really nice. You have 1 more minute. That's it, you can finish as you wish, but the idea behind the exercise is to try and use this situation as a challenge to think differently than the linear way that we have been trained to think. And that's one of the challenges I think that transmedia gives us, is that we are faced with the opportunity to think vertically as well as horizontally, to think in 3 dimensions, and to just step out of the usual standards of storytelling using just a timeline. And doubling up the timeline is just one exercise that we can use to try and challenge ourselves by thinking differently. Is there anyone who, it would be wonderful if one or two of you would like to come and share his or her idea up here. Would anyone like to do that? Yeah?
I think it would be interesting on the broadcast screen to show a fashion show, a high-end show, and then on the handheld screen, you see a real woman putting together something that is being inspired by this. Then you add to it, in real life, the viewer can take a photo of what they're doing and send it in, which will be projected on a screen at the fashion show that's at the broadcast screen, so it's in a circle.
Great. Could you write that down? Perfect. Great. Thank you. Anyone?
I have,
Yeah?
the first thing that occurs to me is almost any of Shakespeare's plays with villains that have a complete separate plot line going on where you know exactly what's going on in their mind, and these two worlds eventually colliding from these two different media sources, and then perhaps even in a live event, watch them come to fruition. Adapting Shakespeare to the new generation of media, as they did in silent films, and now we're doing it with this.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Another person? Yeah?
Well, a lot of my work and what I'm really interested in is the interior life of people, like what's going on inside their minds and their consciousnesses. And, I'm interested in how, we may put on one performance, but there's something different going on inside. So my idea was, say there's a guy working at an office or something like that, and maybe he doesn't like his job and he doesn't like his boss. So you see him going into, on the big screen, you see sort of a movie of him going into his boss's office, and on the little screen, you sort of see what's going on in his mind, which is that as his boss is talking down to him or chewing him out, he's fantasizing about, humiliating his boss or smacking him or something like that. And you really get, a good feel for the contrast between, people's inner lives and what they actually do, what happens.
Fantastic. Thank you. One last one?
So I was thinking about a regular rocket launch that you probably see on TV, and then what would be playing out on the small screen as they're counting down and preparing it and whatnot is one of the astronauts starts to go ballistic. He doesn't want to go up in the flight, and so the people on the ship are trying to control him and not let him scream because they're on the ground. And in the process of struggling with him, they're starting to hit buttons in the ship, and this would then ultimately change the direction of where they are going to land, as opposed to being on Mars or whatnot. They might be on some totally different planet, and the ground crew can't find them because they don't really know where they are. And so this sets up a new way to tell a sci-fi story of them landing on some totally different planet and how they are adapting to that situation.
Great. And all that in 3 minutes, right?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily get to the new planet, but then it would be
yes, the indication. Thank you very much. I will, for those of you who would like to share this with me, then I promise I will be sending it to everyone who will have shared that. Thank you very much for doing the exercise. I would just like to close in saying once again that one of the reasons why we are looking into all these apparently totally way off experiences for a broadcaster is because we feel that it's the art of storytelling which is being challenged by all the new options that we have at our disposal. Another thing that I personally believe in very strongly is that the more time we spend online, on social networks, developing the virtual dimension of our social relations, of even our friendships, our emotional relations with one another, the more virtual this world becomes, the more the need we have to actually experience things in the physical world, in the physical dimension. on a one-on-one experience in the physical world. And for that matter, to me, transmedia is not about new technologies, it's not about new gimmicks, it's not a geek thing. It's really about exploring ways with a participatory, immersive, and interactive dimension. And I think that it's an amazing time to do this. And because the old system is definitely challenged economically, we have an opportunity to reinvent the art of storytelling, which is an essential part of what makes us human. We need to tell each other stories because that's our way to transcend reality, and it's an essential need that we have as much as drinking, sleeping, eating. For that reason, I believe that we have a bright future ahead of us, provided that we're ready to question everything that we do so that we can move forward. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I can take questions if you have. There's a mic on the left.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm totally on board with most of what you said, and I'm interested to know if anybody's doing augmented reality as a way to present news or current information. In other words, I live in Beijing now, and I thought it would be very interesting to, you walk by a building, you know what news event happened there, or a business deal, or it could be a murder or whatever. I thought that might be a way you could also have since we're all having problems supporting ourselves, no doubt you could have advertising and other things.
Yeah, there may be, I have to say, I don't know. It's not, the news is not at all the field that I focus on. I'm sure people are working on that. Maybe someone in the audience knows about projects that around augmented reality and news and information. It's amazing the number of projects that are happening and people working around all these technologies today. So I'm sure somewhere someone is working around this, but it's not something we're doing.
Thank you. And the issue of, okay, Hollywood, how they do their thing, how they tell stories. A lot of people from the independent film world want to tell different stories when they use transmedia, different ways of storytelling. But I think there's something great about Hollywood, their ability to, they basically hacked the story thing for the human race. Like, they have the formula of storytelling that can often be boring when they get too formulaic. But it's basically, I guess, what you call linear storytelling. So from what you do, is it departing from just the way we're telling the story, the media that we're digesting the story from, or is it really, do you see it more as messing with the whole idea of like linear storytelling?
Not necessarily. I don't think that if by linear storytelling we mean a progression with a beginning, a middle, and an end, that does not necessarily have to be done with. I think it's totally compatible with a multimedia or transmedia approach, like the little exercise we just did. If you had two screens, a main screen and a second screen, you can still do that using a linear structure to the story. Using different devices and using different platforms does not necessarily mean deconstructing the chronology of a story. Once again, it's really depending upon the very nature of the story. Some stories do not lend themselves at all to a transmedia approach. And the beauty of a very simple story is to remain very, very simple and to be just told, whispered to someone's ear with no participation whatsoever. It's really a question of how the designer of the story experience wants to how he or she wants to convey the story. But it's perfectly okay, and we will have both from now into the future. We will have traditional stories, linear stories with no interaction, nothing, and it will be great. And on the other side, we'll have some with a lot of participation and gameplay, etc. Whether it's a Hollywood studio film or it's an independent film doesn't really matter, I think. It's really up to how you want to tell the story and what the story calls for.
I have a feeling this may be a naive question, but these very innovative and exciting projects, how do they become successful? Are you using traditional means of letting people know about them? I mean, are you advertising on Arte, the shopping center? Are you using newspapers and magazines? And how is it, or are people just discovering these forms of transmedia, other than what's on television?
We are absolutely promoting them. For instance, the LARP movie that we're about to do, we are doing the call for participation on our website. We will be using blogs, we will be using friends' websites to advertise it. But yes, we also do this because we want to project an image of our company as a pioneer in all these experiences. So yes, we do promote it as much as we can. We know, we're very much aware that we were taking a risk because the LARP movie experience has never been done before, and it may be a complete failure, it may not work at all, but we're ready to take that chance, and we really are interested in evaluating the ripple effect of an event like this. The LARP movie is only 28 people, but the fact that this experience happened is bound to create some kind of buzz, some kind of ripple effect that we absolutely want to maximize. I think one last question?
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier about with the rise of Facebook and where you have a virtual community, that there's a creative reality that is creative reality, because it's something that I'm finding that there are people that I'm connected to on Facebook that I've actually never met, and that creates a whole new level of relationship. And could you how does that link into what you were talking about earlier about a virtual reality?
Yeah. I mean, the nature of the relationship that we established with a Facebook friend, for instance, the very notion of a friend on Facebook is very relative, compared to what a friend is in real life, at least by my standards. When I get a message that I am requested to like this page, it's like so weird. I never say yes. I mean, how dare you request that I like you? I mean, it's something you don't do. Just the wording is really, really uncomfortable. So it creates a whole, for me, devaluation in terms of vocabulary, but also behind the vocabulary, the very notion of what friendship is. So, but I think we know this and we feel this. So we're using those words of friends, poking, liking, etc., knowing that it doesn't have the same meaning on Facebook as it does in real life, right? So it creates, once again, a hierarchy in our relationships. How many of us still get handwritten long letters in the mail? I haven't gotten one in ages. You do? You're lucky, because it's really something that has become the haute couture of relationship, to do this. I mean, you have real life, real emotions, but then the next step is handwritten long letters, and then most of us would get mails and text messages. So this, we understand that it's not the same thing. Going in and visiting a friend rather than sending our friend an SMS. And the relationship with a virtual friend on Facebook has nothing to do with the relationship with a close friend. So this, once again, this hierarchy of how we relate to one another parallels the hierarchy that we have with the media. So, and we can play with this, and we like to play with this, and we will become more and more agile at navigating those different levels of what we call reality, including our social networking, I think.
It just brings up something else was in connection with Facebook. They have the poke function, and you get poked by somebody you've never met personally in your life.
Yeah.
What's that supposed to mean? I mean,
it's a long discussion that goes beyond the
I
topic
know.
of today. But it is. I mean, it is absolutely part of the of what I was addressing by trying to consider what is reality. And to me, this is really on the edge of fiction and reality, and poking and getting new friends is more part of fiction than reality to me. I think we have to stop, right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.